Hello, everybody. It's Sunday, and in some places Monday. Looks like my audio is coming through all right. Let me know if there's any problems. And the video is doing the video thing that it's supposed to. Great. So today I'm going to be talking about the Genrenauts role-playing game. Of course, now that I just went live, I have a tickle in my throat, but everything is going to be fine. Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work on the Genrenauts game in the last couple of months, on top of other stuff previously, and I am getting ready to do some external playtests or no-look playtests where I will not be in the session, but people will be playing this game and then giving feedback. So I'm very excited about that. I put out a Google form for people to sign up to playtest toward the start of the month, I think. Time is a wibbly-wobbly illusion at this point. But I got a bunch of responses, and so I went through those, and I've had some chats with some of the people who kind of volunteered to GM games. And one of the next things I need to do, probably not on the stream because it will take more concentration than I think I can probably muster while also doing the streaming thing, in looking at people's schedules and how they're lined up to kind of set things up so that I can send information to the GMs for them to be able to do planning. I also emailed people and asked them to kind of give their give kind of affirmative consent to for me to send their email addresses to one or another of these GMs, since when people signed up for the forums, I did not say specifically, I'm going to give this email address to somebody else, or I'm going to be connecting you with these other people. So I want to be really upfront about that and not kind of surprise people, especially because sometimes people want to use different email addresses for different kind of situations. Great. Yep, I don't remember. I think I picked this name because Michael R. Underwood is a very long internet handle. Or even Mike R. Underwood is pretty long. And Turbo Tango used to be my name for a few things, but then when I started having books out, I switched it to a more my meat name kind of a situation. But what that means is that I now have a mess of internet handles, which is not necessarily the easiest to then consolidate back under, because Michael and Underwood are both fairly common names, and so like consolidating under one name is not the easiest thing. I'm glad that you're able to get have consistency in naming. That's really handy when you can make it happen. So yeah, my plan today is to talk a little bit about other stuff that I've been doing recently with the Genrenauts game, show off a couple of things that I've been working on that I think are really fun, and then maybe talk through... so let's see, would I add that as a tag? I suppose I could do that. Writing, hashtag writing. I'm sort of writing. It's writing and game design. But anyway, but thank you for the recommendation. Yeah, it's going to be weird to have people playing the game and I'm not around, but it's also really good because since I'm making a game based on something else that I wrote, I have this big advantage where, as the writer who is also the creator, I can just reach outside of the text of the game to knowledge that I have as the creator of the novella series for when I'm running the game. The GMs that volunteer to do this do not have that advantage. So what I want to do is to be able to give them the information that they need to feel comfortable running a game without necessarily having then like also read all the novellas or something, though they are going to be provided with those for reference to whatever degree they want to use them. And there's a tricky thing where sometimes experience or fluidity of GMing can let you like make up for maybe one or another of a game's shortcomings or weak points, because you can just kind of play around the weaknesses of the game. And it doesn't. And this is not to say that the other people who are GMing are not strong GMs. That part's not as important as, because I have a lot of experience GMing specifically Forged in the Dark games, I may subconsciously GM around things that another GM who is just as experienced but is coming at Genrenauts from a more outsider perspective would I be able to identify, like, yeah, this part I kind of had to play around this, and they're going to be conscious about it in a way that I'm not conscious. So let me... So Coffee Quills, do you mean hashtags for on Twitter or tags for on Twitch? And I know it's very late for you, so if at any point you need to go and do something else, absolutely do not worry. I appreciate all of your feedback thus far. Okay, yeah. Yeah, please don't stay on my account. Have a good night. And hello, the kids are asleep. So yeah, having other people GM will be good because everybody has their own individual style. Everyone has their own perspective on the game and how things work. And that's going to be really handy. So one of the things that I may work on today is developing some notes for the first round of playtester feedback forms that I create for the different groups. Because my hope is that at least one, ideally both of the campaigns, and maybe the mini series that someone is potentially running, if I can get all of those, support those folks to get those up and running in September, then I will start being able to solicit feedback from people's experiences. The hope with at least the two campaigns is that those will run like a dozen or more sessions, where they will kind of play through a whole arc of what I expect a Genrenauts campaign to be. Because part of what I want feedback on is, does this number of missions or this number of sessions feel like it works for the ways that the mechanics work right now? Did you get enough time with each of the regions, or did something kind of become stale, or did it feel like you were going back to the same place too often? Did you feel like you were just getting started? Did it feel like you didn't have enough downtime actions to do the things that you wanted, and that was a fun pressure? Or did it feel like the downtime actions didn't line up with what you needed to do in a way that consistently felt bad but not exciting? Because in Blades in the Dark, the first Forged in the Dark game, the sense that I've gotten is that the design intent is that you're not going to have enough resources to keep up with all of the pressures coming in at you, and that therefore the game is going to feel like it's escalating and tension is rising over the course of a campaign, and therefore the stakes are also rising. And I want some of that sense in Genrenauts, but the tone of Genrenauts is, brighter and a little bit more. If there's a grim to bright axis, and a gritty to action hero cinematic axis, I think Genrenauts is a little bit more action hero in general and substantially more positive in tone. And so I'm adapting a rules system that has one kind of XY location on this two-dimensional map that I've kind of described here, and I'm designing a game that's somewhere else. So some of these elements that are built into Blades in the Dark and a lot of Forged in the Dark games also point toward tone and some of these other style and aesthetic choices. So I want to make sure that I'm setting the game up to enable the type of fun, the type of play, the type of storytelling that I want the game to do. So that requires getting feedback. I've already gotten some feedback from my home game, aka running the game for the Strange Friends, including The Kids Are Asleep. and they've given great feedback. I've run external playtests, 2 with one group and 1 with another group, and then if I can get to Big Bad Con, pandemic willing and fate willing, then I will kind of run the game for another set of people. But I'm hoping to get this longer chunk of playtest experience with these outside groups, get feedback from them a few times over the course of that campaign experience, and make sure that their play experience of the campaign and how all of those pressures and systems align, to see how they feel about that, and to see whether what I expect it to be like lines up with their experience playing the game. Because if their experience is different than what I was thinking it would be, that is probably where I'm going to want to look at how the systems interconnect and see if I've miscalibrated something. And I want to increase the number of missions that you go on, or increase the amount of renown that you get for doing a mission, so that you have this resource that you need for extra downtime actions. And Forge in the Dark games have a lot of interconnecting gears, is one of the ways that I think about it. And so a little bit, something being a little bit off with one of the gears can really gum up the game, has been my experience. So that's kind of a breakdown of what is going on there. Looking at so one thing that I want to do today that's kind of live design / design diary is look at resistance. And so now I'm going to go over to my in-game, actually I'm going to studio mode, and I'm going to go to in-game, no, not that one, this one, and then I'm going to try to add window capture. No, actually, let's do display capture for this one so that I can get both, and then we'll see how well it works. Because my main screen has a very big display. That looks like it mostly will work. Okay, and then I place this behind everything. Okay, I think that'll work. Let's make it go. All right, so here's a bunch of text. On the right, I have my prep notes for designer diary session, where I basically made notes to myself of what I wanted to cover and some draft stuff for playtesting questions. And then I have the current Genrenauts playtest doc here on the left. So I'm going to search for resistance. Resistance roll. Okay, yes, this is what I want to do. So when I change the action ratings, I also change the name of the attributes. So in a Forge in the Dark game, if you're sticking with the structure that was created for Blaze in the Dark, there's 3 attributes, and in each attribute there are 4 action ratings. And when you try to proactively do something, you roll an action rating. They're like skills or approaches. But then when there's a consequence that you want to resist, and resistance is a cool special thing in Forge in the Dark games that I definitely wanted to keep, when you resist, you pick an attribute and you roll that attribute. Your attribute rating is equal to the number of different actions in that attribute that you have at 1 or higher. And so the the actor, let's just put these in here. I thought that I already done that. So the actor attribute right here, sorry, it's almost getting hidden by my camera. So the actor attribute includes channel, convince, inspire, and provoke. And then I'm gonna do crew and director. I may change the order of this, but that's not important for now, because this is in reverse alphabetical order right now. I may or may not want to put these in alphabetical order on the character sheet itself. That is a little bit more a question of presentation than of core mechanical design. So if a character wants to use inspire in their game during a session where they found a supporting cast member who, like this Genrenaut, wants to kind of push forward as the hero who's going to deal with whatever the threat is that's again exacerbated by the breach. If the Genrenaut wanted to be kind of like the advisor character and give just the right piece of advice that will let the supporting cast member, this person who lives in the genre world, kind of take that step, that heroic step that they need to address the big challenge and be the hero, and they roll inspire. But then they get a mixed success. And so maybe the success is they are going to go and do the thing, but the consequence is that they're going to act so selflessly that they're maybe going to get themselves like severely hurt. And so the GM would say, okay, you get a success, but the consequence is that this hero is going to go in and get themselves really hurt. And so then the Genrenaut could say, well, I want to resist that consequence. And then when you resist a consequence, you have to say how you're going to resist it. So you would use your actor attribute when you resist consequences related to socialization, force of will, or performance. I would say as the GM that a character trying to resist a consequence from basically I make this convince roll, or I make this inspire roll, but then that somebody takes it not the way that you intended. They take this as like, oh, self-sacrifice is necessary in this fashion, and that means that you should go and do something even if that gets you killed. It would make sense to then roll your actor attribute to resist that consequence. I could theoretically see someone saying, well, I'm going to resist this as a director or with my director attribute, because resist consequences related to confusion, misdirection, synthesizing information, or following narrative threads. Confusion and misdirection, maybe, where it's like, okay, a director might be the person who would come in and say, no, don't play the beat like this, play the beat like that. But I think it still makes sense for actor to be the attribute that someone would be more likely to roll a resist using in that situation. But we can see here that in the resistance area, I have use your actor attribute when you resist consequences related to socialization, force of will, or performance. Cool, already there. Use your director attribute. I already read through this. Use your crew attribute when you resist consequences related to physical injury, choreography, or X. And I feel like I've got to get one more step with the crew attribute. So crew has combat, maneuver, sneak, and waylay. So is that like physical injury, choreography, or discovery? Is it like related to physical injury, combat, or choreography? Yeah, discovery. So let's say yeah, because if you're rolling combat and you get a consequence, that consequence might not be physical injury, but you could still roll crew to resist it, but maybe that then falls under choreography. And discovery, yeah, this is tricky because discovery could be someone sees through your disguise when you're like acting, and so you roll convince, but then you're discovered and you roll crew attribute instead. That I'm not super sure about. The attributes in Blade's core are insight, prowess, and resolve. That's cool because I feel like the wording on prowess is good. Insight and resolve sometimes can be confused for each other a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, yeah, it's basically brain, body, will. Like in an earlier draft of the game, I had stats that lined up more with the way that they're written in Court of Blades, where it's mind, body, spirit. I like the actor, director, crew thing comes from a brief interlude where I considered remaking this game as a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And then I was saying to myself, okay, self, if this is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, what are the stats? And that is how I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe the stats are actor, director, crew, writer, something. That the stats would represent the kind of different stances that somebody might take in their approach to taking an action. So I'm looking for... Actually, I'm just going to recreate the wording that I think John used. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering. Okay, so that is one thing. Nope. Okay, I'm changing my mind. I'm gonna go about things slightly differently. Because I'm looking for the part of the book where it says you roll this to resist this, roll this to resist that. So instead I'm going to look at core system, because resistance's armor is there. Actions. So let's look here for attributes. No. A thing that's tricky about Blades in the Dark is that the game is so interconnected in how it's designed that it's sometimes hard to know exactly where to go to look for something, because everything kind of relates to lots of other things. Okay, so maybe I can give myself a little bit of a break here, because the text in Blades in the Dark says insight, when you make a resistance roll, use one of your character's attributes. The GM chooses the attribute based on the nature of consequences. So GM chooses in Blades in the Dark, kind of core as written, if we take Blades in the Dark as the thing from which you are potentially deviating in a Forged in the Dark game. Insight is resist consequences from deception or understanding. So insight would line up with actor. So consequences from deception or understanding, consequences from socialization, force of will, or performance. So these are not quite the same thing. Prowess, resist consequences from physical strain or injury. So maybe that, does prowess then not include consequences from physical discovery? So maybe not. Resolve, resist consequences from mental strain or willpower. When I look at those three descriptors, and then I look at the descriptions I have for resistance, that makes me feel a little better. But I'm going to check to see if there's a longer write-up for insight, prowess, and resolve somewhere else, because sometimes that happens. There is a short write-up in one place, and then there's a longer write-up somewhere else. And I'm going to keep vamping while I look. So page 32 is the resistance section as that I just looked at. Resistance role, attributes. Okay. Maybe fine. Maybe that. All right. I'm just going to leave that as is. I think we're going to leave discovery because it's choreography is broad, and I like it being broad because one of the things you can do here is you're in Regency Romance and you try to address a challenge by like doing something while you're dancing with somebody at a ball, but then you need to resist a consequence and you use your crew attribute to do so. Basically, and you would use your crew attribute anytime when being a really good person on a stunt team or being a great extra would help you solve the problem or avoid a problem. You'd use actor when being a great like on-screen named performer would help you do a thing. And you could use director whenever a director's kind of insight, perspective, or kind of value add in engaging with or like moving a performer could solve a problem. And so the director attribute is contains analyze, operate, perceive, or trail. So a lot of these are about discernment. So do I want to go to confusion, discernment? Let's say related to discernment, confusion, synthesizing information, or following narrative threads. And this I'm really explicit about because I want to make it easy for someone to know what to do when you're trying to resist genre Nazi very specific things. Each attribute so I'm going back to my text here. Each attribute resists a different type of danger. Let's say a different type of consequence. If you get stabbed, for example, you resist physical harm with your crew rating. Resistance rolls always succeed. You diminish or deflect the bad result, but the better your roll, the less stress it costs to reduce or avoid the danger. So maybe I can add a thing here. I'm gonna add a little this is almost an HTML anchor. I use it as such. It's just not as fancy because this is not an HTML file. This is just a Word file. What I'm looking for is I'm going to go look for attribute in general because attribute ratings is here. That's okay, great. So I think, yeah, this is resist consequences. So if I look up here for attribute ratings, each attribute has a rating. Okay. Attributes in Genrenauts representing the three major approaches that a Genrenaut will take in addressing challenges. As an actor, as a member of the crew, tech, stunt team, etc., or as a director. So I want to be really clear about this because I did actually have someone in one of my playtests who did not make that connection. Now, this was a fairly fast playtest and we were covering a lot of ground, but I'd like to think that being explicit about what I mean when I'm giving these attribute names may make it easier for people to be able to interpret how then it's going to make sense. Now, if the GM is the one who is doing the picking, then it just has to be clearer to the GM, but it's going to be better if it's clear to everybody because if the GM says like, yeah, that sounds like a crew resist, and the person is like, but I was acting, I was pretending to be somebody, want to make it easy for the GM to explain their thinking in this, so that we don't have like frustrations in the disconnect between how a player thinks about how something should work and what the GM thinks. So we're just adding a little bit of text here. We added a little bit down there. We can cut this thing here. So there are 3 attributes in Genrenauts, representing the 3 major approaches that a team member will take in addressing challenges. As an actor, so this is going to be that. As an actor, as a member of the crew, tech, like of a film, theater, or as a director. Genrenauts move between several modes of engagement and approach, drawing on their interdisciplinary knowledge of storytelling and performance forms. So this is me kind of using some fiction and context to explain why is it actor, crew, and director. This is a mechanical manifestation of this interdisciplinary experience that Genrenauts have, where they learn to think about things. Are you doing something as an actor? Are you doing something? Are you being crew right now? Are you being a director, where you're trying to see, analyze, or push something that's happening in the story? These attributes line up. Not all of them line up super perfectly. Trail, I think, is maybe the least directory thing, but I don't know that sneak, waylay, maneuver, or combat made more sense as director actions. So I think this is the best of what I have available, and that's why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing. But now I need to clean up this language. So these 3 attributes are also what a player character uses to resist consequences, because I don't have anything about resisting down in here. Yeah, waylay or maneuver is maybe director adjacent, but for me, both waylay and maneuver feel more really hands-on even than trail, because you can use trail to track someone, and you could use trail to like do your ranged attack thing, maybe, if you needed to. In Blades in the Dark, this is hunt, or the analog is hunt, and then they're in a game, Hack the Planet, it's trace. And I like those because a lot of these actions are, they can be a verb or a noun, and that creates some flexibility. You absolutely want to want your actions to be a verb, so that you can say, I analyze blah. So something like that. Perceive is a little bit tricky, but I like analyze and perceive, borrowed / stolen from Girl by Moonlight, because I think the difference between analyze and perceive is clearer and easier to understand than the difference between study and survey. But that's just me. So this is how much of a difference any of this makes is a little bit hard to tell, because these actions are especially in director and crew, these actions are closer to direct analogs to the actions in Blades in the Dark. Waylay's closest analog is wreck, but while a bunch of scoundrels would want to wreck something, Genrenauts are often not going to want to wreck a situation, they're going to want to waylay someone. They're going to want to like create a delay or a diversion or a detour. And so waylay as a word makes more sense to me as a thing that describes one of the 12 top things that Genrenauts would do during a mission to try to pursue their goals. Because that's ultimately what action ratings are. They are your primary verbs. When we get down to actor, convince, inspire, and provoke are genuinely different from command, sway, and consort. But the thing is, consort is a very scoundrelly word, and it's used in a very conspiratorial manner in Blades in the Dark. And I wanted, if we were using command, consort, and sway, what's the thing that you roll to basically be the advisor that will get a character to go and be a hero? Maybe it's command, maybe it's sway, depending on your approach. And we had a little bit of awkwardness with that in playtests. And so I've got these 3 actions that are different. Provoke is sort of command, sort of has some overlap with command. Convince has some overlap with both sway and consort. Inspire maybe is a little bit more like consort, but it's not actually a one-to-one. But I like these 3 as social actions because they also represent a different approach or different sets of point of views, where convince, inspire, or provoke are things that you do to prompt other people to action, because the Genrenauts, wherever they can, are trying to get the people of this story world into a position where they can address their own challenges, where they can be the ones who stop a story breach that's like snowballing out of control. 1, because it produces less ripple, less disruption, and 2, because it honors the agency of the people of this world and like what the Genrenauts think about these people from other worlds, and how much do the Genrenauts do and don't they think about these people from other dimensions as people, kind of with their own subjectivity, is like maybe something that's up for grabs. Maybe you're playing a character who was trained to see people in a certain way and then comes to see them in a different way, or that argument or that tension can be something that you play within your team, and I wanted to leave that space. Plus, it's also fun to have some actions that feel more like they are me creating my own thing and adding something to like the Forged in the Dark lexicon of actions, compared to something like combat, which is just it's either been used somewhere else or it feels like it's just a label change from skirmish. Maneuver is used in a different game. Analyze and perceive are just taken directly. So a lot of these either appear in other Forged in the Dark games, and they are useful and representative of what Genrenauts do in this game enough that I don't feel like I'm just copy pasta from somebody else's game. Ultimately, even with a thesaurus, there are only so many words that convey certain things that people do in an adventure-y mission structure. And some of them just don't roll off the tongue very well. Interlocute as a verb is not something I want to put on a character sheet. If I were making a game that was like very specific in time and place, you might have an action that is duel. And that says, oh, dueling is really important to this world because it's one of the main things that you do, and that's more specific. But that's not this game. Genrenauts is a generalist simulationist game as opposed to a super, super focused singular simulationist game. In terms of simulation, if we're using GNS, gamism, narrativism, simulationism, Genrenauts is narrativist head and shoulders above anything else. But in terms of the simulation elements, it is more about that general thing. And then there's other parts of the game that get specific to subgenre. That's in the region stuff. So that's that. So we looked at Redefine. Yeah, that's all good. I feel comfortable with that. So the next thing that I had on my to-do list was in the GM section, part about how to ensure that the PCs get to take agency and be the main characters of the game, even if the characters are foregrounding other characters as the main characters of the story in a mission. This is my shorthand to myself while I was watching a video earlier today and taking notes. So let's go to GM section. GM section, great. So this is another area where I'm going to add a fair bit of text at some point. We have some principles. A few of these are really specific to Genrenauts. Other ones are, I think they are either fairly universal or fairly broadly applicable within story games, as in types of RPGs that are concerned with story and storytelling first. And some are still applicable broadly and generally for a game that has kind of a heist vibe. Genrenauts is narrative heists versus like go and steal an individual thing. But that heist to heist cross applicability is a big part of why I chose Forged in the Dark as the system to use for adapting a Genrenauts role-playing game. I had already been working on Genrenauts when the Blades in the Dark Kickstarter either was announced or launched. And so I looked at this and went, oh, wow, you could do Genrenauts with this. And that's kind of where that where we are here can be traced back to that moment very clearly. And so we have some GMing principles. I will want to unpack these a little bit. I don't think that this section is in the SRD, so I cannot use, or I do not want to just reuse the text from Blades in the Dark, because that is not, I do not explicitly have permission to do so. So I'm not going to use exactly that wording, but address the players, address the characters, that appears in multiple role-playing games. So I feel fine doing that. I just have to put my own words into what does address the players mean. So Ripple, this is other GMing stuff. This I will need to unpack, or I would like to unpack. I feel like a lot of people who are familiar with general narrative theory are going to know what the difference between minions, named enemies, and major threats are. But that's another thing to add, to go in and add. So this is this. Here is an important part in this game. One of the things that I added in the region write-ups is breach advances. And the idea with this is that when a region, when there's a story breach in a region that creates enough disruption or snowballs enough, something fundamental in that region changes. And for the Genrenauts game, a substantial breach gives the GM the chance to pick some way in which that region has become more cynical or more misanthropic. Basically, where stories of that genre are an order of magnitude more pessimistic or antagonistic toward people being able to live their lives in a happy and fulfilled fashion. So genres can get worse for the people in them, and then that then creates problems for the people on Earth Prime. So if we looked into the history of, let's say, the space opera genre, we would see more blatant imperialism, more racism, more sexism, and things like that. If you want in your game, that can be one of the ways that things get worse. And those are represented by breach advances. However, maybe you don't want that as you're in your fun. Maybe if you're like, hey, what if we didn't have a thing where Space Empire gets worse and nastier and is impossible to escape? Or what if we didn't have our romance genre or rom-com become worse by kind of slipping back into a mode where only cis het people got to have romance, and that queer people just kind of didn't get to have the happy endings or get to be the focus of stories within this formula, within this format. Like, we're in a place right now where in the kind of international English language, capital R romance publishing world, there is increasingly space for queer people to be at the center of romances. And that's great. If people want to specifically struggle against those oppressive forces, I have these breach advances to do that. And so there's a write-up in here that talks through that. Like, don't use these unless everyone positively affirms that they're interested in including them and that type of content is interesting to them. And investigating or engaging with. So there's also stuff in here that's like, don't just assume that the marginalized people at your table will be cool with it or will be fine because of something else. Like, if I'm GMing a game and everybody in that game is a person of color, I don't want to just assume for them that they're cool with having fantasy racism in one of these worlds. That should be something we talk about ahead of time. And it is my general belief that if you're talking about whether to include stuff along an axis of marginalization and oppression, if that's not an axis on which you are marginalized, you should defer to people in your group who are, because they're the ones who it's going to immediately and more intensely impact. That's just me. But I'm designing the game, so I get to put this in here the way I want to. And that's what I'm doing. And mission generation, where am I going to put? So I have a bunch of tips, and then I have these plot generators. Great. So I want to find a place to put in this bit about taking agency. Mission generation, breach, threats and tier, ripple. Okay. To act. So this is where I'm just going to copy paste this other stuff that I have, and I'm going to put it in brackets, because I'm not necessarily going to work through all of the, like, literally generating the text here, because I don't know that that's as interesting. That makes it more fully I'm just designing on stream kind of stream, which is not as much what I'm going for today. Because what I want to do today is kind of check in about stuff I've already been doing and show off some of the fun parts. That is more of what I want to do today. So in a lot of RPGs, there are random tables. I think random tables can be fun. I often do not use random tables because, or I think the biggest reason is that my brain is an ideation machine. And so if you ask me, like, hey, what might happen if X, there's a good chance that I will be able to give you 3 ideas within a minute. That's just how my brain works. Sometimes it's too many. It's too much. I come up with an idea and I say, well, but it could also be 3 other things. And that's sometimes that's not what you need. So every genre has common patterns in what kinds of stories occur, people, places, and plot beats that pop up most often. These random tables are designed as inspiration and/or a catalyst for devising missions for your Genrenauts team. Do not feel limited to elements shown in these charts, and feel free to adjust any results if you have another idea that you like better. My design intent here is to, 1, communicate to people who are playing or considering playing the game what I, as the designer, think are the kinds of things that will show up in insert name of region. And 2, I want to give GMs something where they can just literally roll 4 dice and they'll have the core of a plot for a Genrenauts mission. And so here's the example. This is me literally doing that thing using modern action, which is the first genre that I have a write-up. So here's the example. I roll 5, 1, 3, 4. So we go down to here. In modern action plot generator. In place, hero tries to thwart villain, I'm using the 4 dice version. In place, villain plans to plan, except breach. But this should be twist, because I changed how this works to give a little bit more flexibility. So 5, sporting event, villain, a cruel law enforcement officer, plan, destroy a landmark, twist, they were interrupted by weather. And so that's at a sporting event, a cruel law enforcement officer plans to destroy a landmark, but they are interrupted by weather. And so this gives me kind of a very skeletal plot outline from which I can then ask myself questions like, okay, so what's the breach? The twist is often the thing that's going to create the breach, but not necessarily, because stories that are not like going wrong or breaking have plot twists in them, right? There's twists in lots of things. But what I tend to think about when I'm creating Genrenauts plots is it's the wrong twist at the wrong time, or when there is something that is the expected, quote unquote, dramatically appropriate thing to happen, and then it doesn't happen, or it goes the other way. So in the Genrenauts novellas, in the rom-com story, the two characters, the time when they should, quote unquote, should be reconnecting, when they're about to make the decision or like the personal change that will put them in the position where then they can be their best selves with this person, it just doesn't happen. So that's when a plot beat doesn't happen. But sometimes the breach is because a plot twist happened where you wouldn't expect it to. So in the second novella, The Absconded Ambassador, an ambassador gets kidnapped, and then they're returned, and then they're kidnapped immediately again. Like if someone pitched that to me and I was an editor, I would probably go, wait, what are you doing here? Why is this happening? So that's the dissonance that I'm generally going for. These charts or these tables should, for the most part, give us stuff that will make that will make figuring out what's the breach, what would happen without the breach, what will happen next if no one intervenes. It'll get the ball rolling. So one of the things we can do is I can play test my own stuff we're going to roll 4 dice again right now, but we're going to go to a different regions thing. And I'm going to, this design diary has now also become a playtest stream. So I'm rolling my dice. Hopefully you can hear the dice clacky sounds. And let's go to rom-com, because I was just talking about that. So I'm rolling 4 dice, and I'm going to read them in order. So in lead 1 meets lead 2, so actually, lead 1 meets lead 2 in meet cute circumstances, and they fall in love, except twist. So I got 3, 1, 1, 4. I'm just going to write these down for my own reference and for yours. No, 3, 1, 1, 2. So a graphic designer and a firefighter meet in when they're thrown together on a work project. So maybe the fire department hires the graphic designer to kind of give the fire department a new look for their fundraising, or the graphic designer is the person who's putting together the firefighter calendar that they're using for fundraising, and then they fall in love. Except twist, an old flame returns. So I can go, okay, well, whose flame is this? Is it a firefighter who transferred to a different team, shows back up for some reason? Is it an old flame of the graphic designer who comes back into their life? And then I think about, which of these do I want to identify as the breach? Do I want to, is this the type of breach where somebody kind of manipulated the situation, some other dimensional traveler, or someone is interfering in this love story without being a dimensional traveler, like, a meddling parent, or the X is inserting themselves into the situation because of their own agenda or something like that. But that lets me go from, okay, my team, it's time for my team to go to the rom-com region, but I didn't prep anything because life happened. I can roll these 4 dice and come up with at least something in probably about 15 minutes, which is good. Because then I can go down to space opera. In setting, hero must deal with threat, but then twist. And so these are not always the same chart. All of these results are region specific, though sometimes stuff recurs because there's overlap. So 1665. In a space station serving as neutral ground, a space wizard must deal with roll twice and combine them. So I'm going to roll twice again. But then somehow villain returns. So now I'm going to roll 2 dice again. I keep getting 6s, 4 and 5. So I might change this 6 to something else. So in a space station serving as neutral ground, a space wizard must deal with a space empire and galactic phenomena beyond human comprehension, but then some villain returns. Okay, especially if we've done missions in this region before, I will be able to get going on some of that. But even if I don't, this takes me from 0 to things that I can bounce off of my mind, and several different things that I can start to draw connections from. Ideally, this will make GM prep way, way easier for this game. And especially, I wanted to have this in place for the playtesters to make that part of this easier, because they are going to be GMing a game that is in progress. They don't have a full 300-page polished and edited book to draw on. This document is currently 32,501 words. I imagine the final product might be as much as 50% again as long. Maybe longer, maybe not. And this is also like Word doc pages, not layout pages, right? So don't hold me to that page count. So we go to Epic Fantasy. When villain attempts to plot, hero must rise to defeat them with thing. And so in this case, we don't have a twist. Maybe I will add a twist chart later on, but let's see how this works. 2146. When a scheming advisor attempts to conquer a kingdom, an apprentice wizard must defeat them with destroying a MacGuffin. Okay? So that gives us some stuff to work off of, and that kind of thing. So Western, which I might drop, so I have charts for, I don't have a full chart for Western. I do have one for post-apocalypse, and then we get into other things. So that's cool. I'm going to leave this part in here because I didn't actually finish all of it. Hey, English! English muffin is often a part of my breakfast original. So, shout outs. I'm very glad that it was good. Hello, welcome. I've been rolling on random plot charts for Genrenauts. So that's that. We're at about 3:05. I'm expecting this will probably go another half an hour or so. What other things that I want to do? Oh, here's something I can do, is I can show off. I'm going to go to just chatting real quick, and then I'm going to try to pull up other genre region stuff that I was working on. Designer, I did a whole lot of, yeah, here's what I did. I did a bunch of desktop cleanup attempts earlier this week, which means that I have opened a ton of documents between when I worked on this new region stuff and now. So it wasn't just showing up in recent stuff. So now we go back to this, and on the left here we have new region development. I've been working on stuff for superhero as a region and on Regency romance. Now, these are interesting because I know the superhero genre so well, and it's a weird genre that it's almost harder to design for. And that's very funny. Now, what I should do is just throw out a bunch of ideas and then cut some of them. So Mantle of Heroism is basically me. Is like, this is a special ability for with great power comes great responsibility, or truth, justice, and the American way is the old Superman catchphrase. I think there's a new one for the younger Superman, like truth, justice, and a better tomorrow, or something like that, which is cooler because it's not nationalistic in the same way. Master of the Mystic Arts is like, oh yeah, superhero is also a fantasy genre. And this is part of what's tricky about superhero, is that from a narrative taxonomical standpoint, superhero could be set aside as being qualitatively different from a subgenre like space opera or epic fantasy or cozy mystery, because superhero tends to be it tends to encompass a bunch of other genres. Here's the fantasy chunk of superhero. Here's not like otherworld fantasy, like, parallel dimensions or like something like that. Here's the urban fantasy part of this setting. So like in Marvel, there's kind of Blade and Marvel Knights is kind of an urban fantasy chunk of the setting. And then Tony Stark and Reed Richards over here in science fiction area, where like for Fantastic Four are more science fiction-y in a certain way. And then we get cosmic science fiction, which is also kind of like fantasy. And then we have detective stories, like in, Batman as a character emerges from detective comics. There's a whole big chunk of the origin of superheroes that emerge from like pulp heroes. And so then there's also a lot of those that are detectives. And so superhero as a genre gets messy when we're thinking about it just as a genre. However, there are things that are really clearly identifiable as being either very common or very potent in terms of their association, or what people go to when they think about what it means to be a superhero story. And again, some of this design is me expressing my point of view. So for me, in the write-up I have now, the XP trigger, the thing that is you did a superhero story, is you addressed a tough challenge related to protecting civilians. Superhero stories are fundamentally, at least partially, about protecting people who are not able to protect themselves, or protecting people when there is a disaster. So to be a superhero, you don't have to have superpowers, because you don't have to have superpowers to try to protect people. So this is a little bit of me saying this is what I mean when I talk about this genre, because you get XP from doing the thing that you're in. You do the thing that is your thing. In Blaze in the Dark, you get your specific crew XP trigger is when you do the thing that is what your type of crew does. If you're an assassin's crew, you get XP when you do an assassination. If you are a smuggler's crew, you get the XP when you do a smuggling. And so the region-specific XP triggers are when you do the thing that is this genre. Other people may say, well, I think this other thing is more essential to insert name of region. And that's fine, because people can make the game their own. And I would invite them to do so, and that's fine. Because ultimately, this is just about what you get XP for. There's not a lot of other stuff that's so dependent on the specifics of a region XP thing that you can't just change it. And that's cool. Part of what I like about Forge in the Dark games is that they are designed to be hacked. There's a lot of transparency in how the pieces fit together. And so it then becomes easier for people to make the game their own, which is lovely, because you can get the kind of fun that you want from a game with less work, because you just change the things that you need to change. So touchstones for superhero Marvel and DC Comics, Astro City, which is a non-Marvel and DC superhero continuity, MCU TV and films. You will note that I did not put DC Cinematic Universe and films because Zack Snyder, I think you're bad at this. Come at me. Not your minions. Your minions don't want to come at me because I will just block all of you. Because this is not a central thing in Zack Snyder films. There is just so much random collateral damage and mass death in Man of Steel. And it just doesn't matter, ultimately, to that story. And I think that's bullshit. If this is supposed to be a superhero story. Because for me, this is what's important in superhero stories. Like, if this were anything else, it would be about something about the nature of heroism. I kind of have something like that's sort of like that in the Western region. So I wanted to go to here. I think that this is a good focusing lens for teams and for GMs when they're thinking about what superhero stories are. You can tell who read Watchmen and Planetary and did not grasp their nuances. I mean, you said it, not me. But yes, very much so. The people who read Dark Knight Returns were like, sick, this Batman rules. Let's do this more. Or people who read Watchmen are like, yeah, the comedian was awesome. If you couldn't tell, that was my sarcasm voice. The point of Watchmen is not the comedian was awesome. So since the superhero genre is kind of into a meta-modernist, post-deconstruction, reconstructivist state in the comics world, TV and film are lagging behind unevenly because stuff is getting adapted at different rates. So it's very funny when like The Boys comes on TV on Amazon Prime, at least in the US, and people are like, oh, this is so revolutionary. Like, not to people who have been reading superhero comics a long time, or anybody who has read these superhero comics from the 80s and 90s, because that is when the primary deconstructionist era of creativity in the genre happened. And so bringing deconstruction to superhero TV and film is echoing more than iterating on or moving past the deconstructivist era in comics. As I understand, I only watched a couple of episodes of The Boys because it didn't do anything for me, because most of the thesis statement of The Boys is everyone sucks. And I live in the real world, and a lot of people suck in the real world, but not everybody. And asserting that everybody sucks is kind of like giving up. And no, absolutely not. No giving up. We have to make a better world, because the world as it is not good enough. Too many people are suffering, and therefore we have to do something. So that goes into storytelling, it goes into how I see storytelling, and so on and so forth. So this has been, I think Mike rants about optimism, pessimism in media probably should go on the Mike stream bingo chart. Yeah, like not every genre appeals to everybody in the same way or to the same degree, and that's fine. Part of what I want from Genrenauts as the game is to have the versatility that people can connect with the genres that they like. Now, if I wanted the main Genrenauts book to have all of the 20 most popular like mass media subgenres, even the top 20 most popular within the USA, the book would be gigantic. So one of the challenges that I have as a designer is how many different regions am I going to put into the book? because if the region write-up chunk, that's going to need to be a big part of the book, TBH. So if we look percentage-wise, so regions stop here. So on page 104 of 122 is when regions stop. And regions start, I'm scrolling very fast, so avert your eyes if this is going to be a problem for you. Regions start on page 60 something, looks like. Page 78. So from page 78 to one something. So a notable chunk of this book is the region write-ups. And these region write-ups are not all totally complete. Some of them I want to add a sample mission. Some of them I have to add a couple of like breach advantages or something else. So I would guess that I'm probably targeting 10 to 20 pages per region write-up. It might end up being less, but look here. Each region has an XP trigger, touchstones, specialist abilities and gear, supporting cast, to kind of give you a leg up on who are the types of people who are the types of characters, like basically the archetypes that are going to be prevalent in this region. Supporting cast are generally who the Genrenauts will go to when they're trying to find somebody who's already in this world that they can bring in to be the protagonist of the story that they're trying to fix. Again, because the Genrenauts inserting themselves in as the main protagonist creates more disruption because they are actually from outside this genre system, the individual genres system. So supporting cast, region advances is basically the team gaining abilities in the region. Breach advances is when the region kind of permanently breaks in a certain way. And then the book write-up will also have, I don't know about this, question mark. Touchstones I already have. Mission case file I want to have. Region plotline clocks. This is a separate thing that actually I need to put like this, because these are designer questions that I'm asking myself. So the kids are asleep is talking about stuff in Genrenauts. Everyone picks regions for their characters to specialize in, so you can very much do what you love. That's like, it's part of what I think the game will have to offer that is exciting for people. Because then when you sit down with your group of friends to start a campaign of Genrenauts, you go, okay, here are the regions we have. What are people interested in? And so if you've got two people at your table, they're like, there's a Regency romance thing. That sounds great. I loved Bridgerton. Or I love insert romance writer who does Regency romances. There are not as many Regency romance RPGs. There's things like Good Society, which rocks, but there's not as many Regency romance games or modern action games or Western games as there are epic fantasy games, science fiction games, superhero games, things like that. So part of what I wanted to do is have region write-ups that are popular but less frequently made into RPGs. So I have a little bit of like, oh, hey, other people aren't doing this as much. And also still offer regions that are very, very popular. So science fiction, action, fantasy, adventure, and things like that. But it's very easy for me to get to 10 popular regions like that. And that's barely scratching the surface. My ultimate hope is that I will find a publisher for this game who will have resources or be able to marshal resources through crowdfunding, where we can go, okay, there's going to be this many regions in the core book, and then a big part of our stretch goals is creating a like region dossier supplement that will have those full write-ups for X number of extra regions, and then be able to reach out to and hire people like contributors to do a lot of that writing, especially in situations where a region emerges from or has some fraught history with people of a marginalized population. So if I have a Western write-up, I would really rather the full Western write-up be written and or edited by a indigenous and or Mexican writer, because of the impact of the Western on how America did manifest destiny and a lots of bad shit that goes with it. So, you know, Western as a genre has a fraught history, as do a lot of genres. Space opera has fraught history with imperialism and colonialism. Romance has a fraught history with racism and homophobia and so on. And like, classism and monarchism, TBH. Like, there's just a zillion dukes in historical romances. Like, in a Regency romance, like, somebody's almost always marrying a count or a duke or something like that, right? There's just so many dukes, and that's fine. So this is a bunch of different things for one region. If we look, Modern Action is one of the most complete write-ups that we have. So we have XP trigger, we have touchstones, specialist abilities. There's 1, 2, 3. I don't know why these are all broken up. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 specialist abilities, some specialist gear, supporting cast, region advances for the team. You don't need as many of these because these are on top of other stuff that you get. And then breach advances. So here's an example. This is, again, me taking pot shots at certain directors. So one of the ways that Modern Action world can become like substantially more misanthropic is the Big Apple always gets it, aka Emmerich/Bay/Snyder style. The region has become absolutely apocalyptic, with every conflict leading to widespread collateral damage. There are no fight scenes without pileups and explosions, no grand finale without a city left in ruins. And that's just the flavor text. Here's the mechanics that go with that. So once permission, the GM creates an additional obstacle clock called collateral damage to represent civilians in danger. In addition to other threats, the team must overcome this obstacle or fail this mission. So you have not succeeded unless you have also protected the civilians. Each time a character takes action to protect civilians or mitigate collateral damage, they mark XP, max of 2 per character per session. So breach advances are a way for the GM to dial up difficulty mechanically as a representation of that genre getting pushed toward cynicism, nihilism, misanthropy, and or oppression. So in the rom-com genre, one of the breach advances is, Lovers in a Dangerous Time. So this is the flavor text. I don't actually believe any of this. Happily Ever After was always meant for certain people. Finding love when you are persona non grata, when you don't fit in what's considered a proper relationship is dangerous. Only that part I believe in. That's just describing the world as it is. So the hard move by the universe here is that attempts to bring together marginalized characters suffer worse position. It is always going to be riskier to do this. And then you get an extra XP thing. So there's a fair bit of social commentary in these breach advances. Quell surprise. Social commentary from moi? So that's that. I think some of these are really cool. There's lots of pop culture references across this because that's just who I am as a person. And so we're going to close that, and I'm going to expand this. Nope, just become the whole window. Now we're going to think about some playtester questions. Yeah, I know, Original. It's very strange. Totally unforeseen. Next, you'll say that you'll get like some kind of commentary about literature from ARV. So in my designer diary to do, this is kind of the document that I had. So one of the things I'm going to need to do is create this playtest feedback form. So initial playtester I've discovered that it actually can be somewhat difficult to say and type the same thing, especially if you don't talk at the same rate that you type. Things you learn. So I just watched a video earlier today from the Tabletop Mentorship Program. I'm going to find this video and link it in the chat because I think it's pretty good. I'm going to mute this site first. So that when I link it, it will show up properly. Okay, so this is a video called How to Lead a Playtest with Emma Larkins. So this is, why? No, go away. Anyway, so there's some chat in there, and this is about an hour and like 18 minutes long, and Emma gives a lot of good advice that I think makes sense. It's interesting, the more I hear about playtest, like how to lead a playtest and how to get something useful out of playtesting, it ends up sounding a lot like critiquing in the writing world. That playtesting a game in development requires, a lot of emotional vulnerability. Getting your work critiqued by colleagues or strangers requires a lot of emotional vulnerability. You have to figure out how to sort between feedback that doesn't make sense for your artistic intent versus feedback that does, but maybe is hard to hear because it is, it's conveying that some artistic effort that you have already done is not landing, it's not hitting its mark. And so this is nice because I'm able to draw on my experience doing critique with colleagues and having my own work critiqued, as well as the far more fraught parallel of this, which is being a public creative figure at any scale, where at this point there are thousands of people in the world who have read my books, and I have heard what hundreds of them think about them. Not everybody likes everything that I write because that basically doesn't happen to anybody. If you have a first book in series and it's very, very, very popular, but there are no reviews below 4 stars, that probably means that it has actually not hit a broad audience. I think this is a little bit trickier because of the way that Amazon sells books. Amazon gets to the point where they try to sell books only to people they think their math will tell them are bound to love those books. But that's not how books do. That's not how books work. Art is not, I think even by a good algorithm right now, quantifiable, identifiably, reliably, predictably in the way that I'm describing here. So it gets tricky. And therefore, when I'm browsing for books on Amazon and I see a book has like hundreds of ratings, but there's only 1 or 2 that are below 4 stars, that tells me that this book is almost exclusively read by people who already like this author's work. And therefore, it's harder for me to get a sense of whether I will like it because all of the feedback is from people who are, in one or another way, predisposed to liking it, either because they already like this author or this is in fact their type of thing. And so unless I can tell from how they describe this work that I will like it in that same way because of how they describe it, I don't necessarily know whether I'm going to like something. A thing to do if you are a creative and are feeling bad about feedback is to go and find your very favorite book in the whole world on Amazon or Goodreads and look at the 1-star reviews. Some book that you treasure in your heart and that is so powerful because of the impact it made on you was considered utter trash by other people because no one book is everything to everyone. So I'd like to think that across that experience, I am a little bit better equipped to handle the emotional turbulence of feedback from playtesting, which is part of why I feel more ready at this point to give the game to people I don't know and have them play with other people that I don't know and then get feedback. One of the advantages that I have is if this feedback is coming to me in text, it's not the same as somebody looking at me face to face and saying that my work is bad and I should feel bad, which is a thing that sometimes happens to creatives because people are assholes. Sometimes. It's not a thing that you should do. You, the hypothetical you, who is watching this. There's a very small number of cases in which I think that is okay, and most of them involve saying to a bigot, "Hey, your work is bigoted and therefore garbage." That's kind of like the big part of where I think that would be applicable. But for the most part, if you read a book and you care about the emotional stability of the author, it's unless you've been asked for brutal honesty and constructive feedback, it probably is not going to help you or them to tell them you think their book is bad. What's the productive result of that? Anyway, that's a different digression. There's a lot of bad in the world, so if you can tell people the things that you like, that's really great. It is hard to measure sometimes how much of a boost it is to have some person that I do or don't know say that they liked some creative work that I did. It's really great. It is hard to quantify, and so therefore I would encourage everyone who watches this to think about works of art that you have enjoyed lately, and then figure out a place where you can go and show your appreciation to that creator in a way that is very easy for them to engage with on their own terms, and that will lift them up. And also consider like writing a review. So like I finished a book, a romance book that I really, really liked, and then I went and wrote a review, and then I've been telling people about it. You can @ the author and said, "I just finished insert name of your book and I loved it. Thank you so much." Like that could really make someone's day. So that's cool. Playtest feedback form is what I'm working on now, as opposed to general feedback about how to uplift creatives. That's a different video again. So the thing I want to do is focus on their experience and emotional responses. How did it feel to play this game? What parts were fun? Parts were the most fun. Not, did you have fun or was it fun? What parts were the most fun for you? Is probably a good question of the session. What parts of the session were the most fun for you? Was it making a character? Was it picking a region? Was it, figuring out what the breach was? Was it talking with some NPC in the Genrenauts HQ? So that's going to be that. I'm going to have other questions that are more about mechanics. A good question that was mentioned in the seminar was, who do you think will go wild for this game? This is basically like, who do you see as the perfect audience for this game? And I might change this to like, who in your life do you think would go wild for this game? Or like, what type of player do you think will go wild for this game? Something that some people mention is using like a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 scale, or A through D, A through E, 4 or 5 option multiple choice for things like, how much did you like the dice system? Or how, this is me like doing something specific to Genrenauts. How did you like the region specialist abilities? Something that I found in my internal playtests is that when I talked about the region specialist abilities, people's eyes lit up. And that told me, okay, I feel like I'm on a good path with these, at least for the regions that are involved. Because it's a different set of abilities for each region. And I want them to be exciting and fun and to convey, oh, this is how this designer thinks about how these regions work. So here's a cool thing that I get to do that will let me engage with what types of stories this region has and the kinds of things that would be useful. So in the modern action region, I have an ability that is called Sidekick, where you can be someone's sidekick and you can boost them. There's an ability that's like Catchphrase, where when you utter your catchphrase, you can do a thing for cheaper. You spend less of a specific resource, and things like that. In the rom-com region, there's abilities that are about, like, it's easier to set up a perfect date for someone, and things like that. So those I really like. Questions to have. Steer feedback to experience and feelings versus things that they would suggest you to change. So this is a big bit that I got from Emma's presentation. So steer feedback to experience or feelings. So the playtester's experience and their feelings versus the things they would suggest that you change. Because a lot of playtesters are not game designers. Some of them are. But for a game designer, the consensus among people that I've heard from is that it's probably going to be more useful to the game designer, to you, the hypothetical you, and in this case me, the game designer, to hear about people's experience of playing and the feelings that they had while playing versus giving you a specific prescription for things they think you should change. So if someone gives the feedback of, I found that I was getting bored after we started the mission, I felt like I was bored and I didn't really care what was going on until we got to blah, like until we got to the fight with the boss. Okay, so that's an emotional situation. That's their experience. They were bored. They weren't as engaged. Because then maybe I could ask a follow-up that was like, what was exciting about the boss fight? Or I would have another question that was, what parts of the session were the most fun to you? And so they would say, they'd have this thing about how they kind of felt bored for a chunk of it. And then they would have, what parts of the session were most fun for you? And then they would have a thing talking about that we had this cool, great moment in the boss fight where something. And then that gives me information. I'm like, okay, what I can think about, what would have made it easier or what would have been engaging for that player before the boss fight to get them excited about the mission based on what they told me about what they liked in the boss fight. Do they just want to get to the climax faster? Okay, if that's the case, what in the mechanics might have stood in the way of that? And it's me to do reflection and interpretation more than a player saying, well, I was bored after we launched the mission until we got to the boss fight, so I think it makes sense that I think you should really use the engagement role to say that you gather a little information and then you cut straight to the boss fight. You can just skip over the other action scenes. I was like, well, that's a thing that I could do. I don't know that I want to. So that's the difference between someone talking about their experience and how they felt during play versus somebody giving you a solution. Now, if I'm playtesting with game designers, it may be that they do in fact have the experience and perspective and insight that their suggestions on things that I could change will be way more on the mark. Just like when I send a novel manuscript to a colleague who has a lot of experience to get their feedback as like an early reader or beta reader, and they tell me, here are the parts that maybe didn't work as well for me. I wrote a book and I had a similar kind of problem, and what I did here was X. And in that case, they're sharing experience and perspective still. There's a little bit of giving a diagnostic or giving a prescription, but in that case, what they gave was a little bit more generous, a little less proscriptive of this is the thing you should do. Some things that I'm going to want to ask about for the Genrenauts game are downtime focused, that kind of pacing, interlocking wheels and gears and thing that I was talking about, but that's not really going to come into play until a few sessions into the game, because for the most part you do your session 0, you build the team and your characters, and then you do a mission, and then after the mission you do downtime, and then you do downtime between missions. I don't think it makes sense, for the most part, in the Forged in the Dark games that I've played, to start with downtime. Girl by Moonlight is different because it has a whole different structure. So I'm not talking about Girl by Moonlight here. So that's going to be my downtime stuff. Something else that I can add. Good questions that were suggested. Other things. What 3 words or feelings best describe your experience with this session? So somebody's response might be exciting, collaboration, and tense. Like, okay, well, that seemed like they were really engaged. They were coming up with ideas together, and it had that kind of sense of drama. Great, lovely. During the teaching segment, or when you were learning the game, what felt unclear? Because that, if a playtester gives good feedback here, I may be able to distinguish between, is there something in the text that is hard to teach or hard to understand, or was there maybe a misstep because people are, humans are fallible, in how somebody was teaching? If we have a playtester who has never played a Forged in the Dark game at all, and then the GM who's running the playtest is trying to teach Forged in the Dark play style in general and stuff that's specific about Genrenauts, then maybe we'd have some stuff that's unclear. And then I can look at the text that I provided, the text of the game, to see if there's anything else I can do to make that easier, to provide a little bit more of a support structure for anybody who is running Genrenauts and trying to teach that part of the game. Feedback. Yeah, I think that's that. Barring just fully writing out my playtest form, which I don't think I want to do right now on stream, because it will involve more of me just staring at the screen like this, which is not as good for streaming. But yeah, so that's the check-in. When this is done and uploaded on YouTube and is okay to be live on YouTube because of my agreement with Twitch as an affiliate, I will link this on my Patreon, because Patreon supporters at $3 and up get access to lots of updates and my kind of whatever the current draft of Genrenauts is, when I have one that is in like a good place to share. And this is, me doing work on Genrenauts is in part enabled by the fact that I have some consistent income coming in from this Patreon support from people who like what I do as a creator, who are interested in the Genrenauts game, and so they're supporting me and supporting me working on that. So that, for this, I'm very grateful. I'm going to go to Twitch in general, and we are going to see if there is someone that we can raid. Whomst can we raid? I'm going to mute that. Not that person. Yes, let's go and raid the T-Monster. This is, the T-Monster is also a science fiction and fantasy writer, but mostly streams Destiny 2. Cleaning bathrooms, so whoever you want. Yeah, no worries. So we're, just going to go and say hi, hang out if you feel like it. Otherwise, no worries. But I like staying in the habit of doing raids just to share the love. So, I do need to go back to here to do this, to go to here. Okay. Thank you so much to everybody who came by. So thank you to Coffee Quills, to Arudnell, to The Kids Are Asleep, and anybody else who was hanging out and lurking, or I forgot. Okay, let's go.